This program is sponsored in part by the National Catholic Society of Foresters. Hello again, I'm Jim Grant and I'm the host of a fantastic program that I enjoy doing as often as I can, looking at social justice. I also enjoy when I have a return guest like Reza Nekumanesh, but better yet when he brings one of his friends, and we'll talk about that later. But I want to tell you when we're doing this program. It's during Ramadan. It's 2 months after the papal visit to the United Arab Emirates, in which the Pope had a very important meeting with the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar, Cairo. He is Ahmad Al-Tayeb. They created, the two of them, on February 4th, 2019, a document called A Document on Human Fraternity for World Peace and Living Together. I am so glad that we can have two good Islamic friends of mine to respond to the greatness of this document written by our Holy Father and one of your great Imams. Reza, can you reintroduce yourself a little? Tell us about the Islamic Center briefly, and then Thabet, can you tell us, please, Thabet, a little bit about my Deen, and then into the topic.
Assalamu alaikum, peace be upon all of you. My name is Reza Nekumanesh, and I get to serve as the Executive Director of the Islamic Cultural Center of Fresno, which is here in Fresno, California, and works as sort of a beacon for interfaith work throughout the Central Valley. And we work to provide a clear, undistorted, and peaceful image of Islam so that people can have a greater understanding about who we are and what it is that we're trying to bring.
Imam Thabet Anani.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum, peace be upon you. I work with My Deen. My Deen is an organization that serves the Muslim community. Also, we do have interfaith programs that we hold annually, especially in the month of Ramadan. We invite people from other faiths so that we'll introduce Islam to them so that they will have a better understanding of what Muslims do in this holy month. So generally, My Deen is an organization. It's not a typical mosque, but it's an organization where it has a facility and provides services for the rest of the community.
I am so glad that both of you are here, and I want to remind our viewers and our listeners, you are Shia, you are Sunni. What's so important is that I'm Catholic, and the idea of unity with the world of Islam is very important, but it's wonderful that we have two representatives of distinct forms of Islam to respond to a document that one of the great Imams, a Sunni, and our own Pope Francis worked on. Let me run through the document and tell you the topics that I'm going to leave you to unpack. The document is all about fraternal love, this idea of human fraternity, but it includes causes for the crisis in the world right now, extremism, inequity, respect for life, what religions must stop doing, pluralism of religion as an ideal, fruits of religious cultural tolerance, how they are both detesting assaults on places of worship, roots of terrorism gets mentioned, East-West relations, women, children, the elderly, and that this document needs to be promoted. Which parts of that do you individually want to begin with? Reza, where do you want to make sure we don't forget to start with?
So there's so many places to start, but I think the introduction, the way that they set off this document is very powerful. They begin in the name of God. They begin in the name of the Creator. And then they begin in the name of the poor, in the destitute, in the marginalized. They begin in the name of justice. They begin in the name of mercy. They invoke that power of God, and they invoke the power of the marginalized people. We know that the most destitute, the ones who are suffering the most their prayers are closer to God's ear. So they're invoking God, and they're invoking our own humanity to act. So I think the beginning already sets it up for a powerful document. And then we move on. I think I would let Sheikh Thabet choose where he would like to go. I guess, you know, if I can, if I just bring up one point and then we move on. Awesome. So they in talking about the sanctity of life and talking about the sanctity of religion and talking about the idea that all religions and religious folks must be protected and all human beings need to be protected from the beginning of life until its natural end, as they put it, because they do talk about euthanasia and many issues throughout. But they also talk about the sanctity of holy places. They talk about the sanctity of mosques. They talk about the sanctity of churches. They talk about the sanctity of temples and synagogues. And in this time that we're living, where our religious centers, organizations, mosques, they're under attack around the world, whether that's in Mali or whether that's in Sri Lanka or whether that's in
Australia,
Christchurch or us, yes, wherever. And here in our own United States, religious centers are under attack in so many different ways, and to know that these two great leaders, Pope Francis and Imam Al-Tayeb, to think that both of them thought that was part of the human right, that these religious places need to be protected, was very powerful. In the Holy Quran, I better ask Sheikh Thabet to maybe he can recite the verse, but there's a verse that says something along the lines that if it were not that God's name were remembered, people would be checked. If it was not that there were places where God's name would be remembered, like churches and synagogues and temples and mosques. The Quran, the Holy Quran for us, God tells us that in these holy places, all of them, God's name is remembered, and that's a way that human beings throughout centuries have been protected. So I think that was a very powerful a point that they made early on.
Yeah, the verse is وَلَوْلَا دَفْعُ اللَّهِ النَّاسَ بَعْضَهُمْ بِبَعْضٍ لَفَسَدَتْ صَوَامِعٌ وَبِيعٌ يُذْكَرُ فِيهَا اسْمُ اللَّهِ, which means that if it wasn't for the good people, for the good leaders getting together and pushing against evil, there always has to be a body of goodness that's pushing against a body of evil. And if it wasn't for that, a lot of, God specifically says, a lot of places of worship and a lot of buildings and a lot of communities will be destroyed with no pushback, basically. Yeah.
Sheikh, is there a part of this document that you particularly did find either exciting or challenging? Because it might not be that everything here is going to be easy to implement or palatable to the entire universe. But when we can get two great leaders of diverse traditions, actually very much diverse people, that they could create a document together, it looks good. What most interested you?
This is the point that is most interesting to me, that those two big leaders are getting together and uniting on I would say, a universal understanding of what faith is, of what religion is, because there are a lot of commonalities between Christianity, Islam, and Judaism that we are in dire need for these people to get together. We are in dire need for our leaders to get together. So this is very interesting. The fact that they put out this official document, I find very interesting. What I find a little bit challenging is the pluralism aspect of it. Yeah, which is how can, when there's a statement in the document in which they say that maybe it's God's will for people to be diverse and to be the way it is today, the way we see it today. The pluralism of even faith could be God's will. There are verses in the Quran that has signs about this, but I would say we need to revisit those verses and maybe look onto these verses in a wider perspective. Yeah.
Let me read the text and then let both of you weigh in on what it means maybe in your congregations and in the Islamic world, because I can tell you what the response would be in the Catholic world. It was not an overwhelming home run. It went a bit out there. So here's what the two of them agreed on. Freedom is a right of every person. Each individual enjoys the freedom of belief, thought, expression of action. The pluralism and the diversity of religions, color, sex, race, and language are willed by God in His wisdom, through which He created human beings. This divine wisdom is the source from which the right of freedom of belief and the freedom to be different derives. Therefore, the fact that peoples are forced to adhere to certain religion or culture must be rejected as to the imposition of a cultural way of life that others do not accept. That is really out there.
Right. So there's a verse in the Quran that says God tells us that, "O mankind, we created you and we divided you into nations and tribes so that you would get to know one another." Two things. One, that verse tells me that the fact that we're different, the fact that we are different in language, in idea, in the way we look, in the way we think, in the way we act, it's not an accident. It's not an accident of history. God willed that to happen. And secondly, He gave us the reason that He did it. It's not so that you would fight. It's not so you would have conflict. It's not so you would struggle or strive with each other. It's so that you would get to know one another. And that's beautiful. The idea that we can have differences. When religious pluralism ever comes up, this is a touchy thing for people because everybody wants to think that we have the answer. We have the faith. We have the only path there is to God, and everybody else is not on that path. It's a very dangerous road to play. You can have your belief systems. Everybody has a belief system, and you have the right to have your belief system, whatever that is. But this document is not telling us that every belief system is the belief system. It's telling us you have the right to have that belief system, that we live in a world where you have the right to have differences. You have the right to have different beliefs. You have the right to express yourself religiously, however that may be. And in countries around the world where that's not the case, where you cannot express yourself and your religion the way that you believe it to be, that's a problem with us and justice and our lack thereof. So the idea of plurality is not just that there are multiple religions and it's that there are multiple religions. Now, are you going to respect all the religions and understand that they're all part of this one society that we move forward in? So when you look at cases, for example, like China right now, which is throwing Muslims into concentration camps, the Uyghur Muslims, there's up to 3 million, and not just Muslims, Christian monks are being forced to wave the national flag as a sign of the nation over the religion. That is not understanding or accepting of our plurality. We look at nations like Saudi Arabia, where they have a state religion, and anybody who expresses their religion differently, the minority groups, they're not welcome. They're not only not welcome, they're oppressed, they're repressed, their rights are taken from them. And this, I believe, is what the Pope and the Imam are speaking about.
Sheikh, where would you want to continue? Because it's exciting for me to know that it is very fair for us to admit where this will be a major step forward, but it's not going to be a major step easy. It's just almost not what everyone in our faiths are thinking. This shocks many and repels others. So what's been the response, personal and maybe at the Deen? How are people with the idea of pluralism of faith?
So that's a discourse that has been discussed even in the Middle Ages, and we're speaking of hundreds of years back. So it's not a new issue, number one. Number two is that there's scholarly understanding of the Quranic text, which poses the following understanding, that every individual, despite their faith, their belief system, they will be, on the Day of Judgment, they will be held accountable for the belief system that they have learned, for the belief system that they were exposed to, for the environment they were exposed to, and how they dealt with that. So that's fine. You can believe that you have the absolute truth, but you cannot compel others to follow. And this is a very clear statement in the Quran. It says there's no compulsion in religion. From an Islamic perspective, we cannot compel onto others and have that, I would say, arrogant view of, arrogant attitude that I own the truth, therefore you don't have much value. In fact, God gives value to human. God says that we are brothers in humanity. So we have to accept that, and we have to. I believe there's, I don't care what people say, but there's definitely a lack of understanding of the divine text, even in the Quran, and could be in the Bible as well.
Could be, definitely is. So thank you for reminding us that we are
Just wanted to speak for myself.
Exactly. Regarding Catholicism, which really I do represent, and very proudly, but over history, I will have to admit this idea that pluralism and that people have rights to their own culture, language, sex, color, not traditional Catholicism. Otherwise, the Inquisition, what meaning? Otherwise, why the expulsion of the Muslims from Spain? We think of 1492, the conquest of the New World to the Europeans. It's also the expulsion of a beautifully rich Islamic culture in Spain. So there's been tremendous abuse of people in charge, but I think both of these leaders are cognizant of that. Where do you see us locally going with either that or other paragraphs?
First, I'd like to pull it back a little bit. You know, I think that both Christianity and Islam have long histories. You have 2,000 years of history within Christianity, almost 1,500 years of history in the Muslim world, 14 and a half centuries. You have points that we should go back to. So Muslims have Prophet Muhammad as the best example, and Christians have Jesus as the best example. Jesus taught the brotherhood of humanity. Jesus taught compassion for all. Jesus taught mercy for all. Jesus taught do for others what you would have them do for yourself. Prophet Muhammad also taught many things. In addition to many of the things he taught, he is an example of sending out messages to non-Muslims, restricting others from infringing on their rights and highlighting their rights. For example, there was a letter that still exists today. It was written around the year 628 to the monks of the St. Catherine Monastery in Mount Sinai, where he honors them. He talks about their faith. He tells them they are protected. He tells them their women are protected, their children are protected, their religion is protected, that they will not be held within the same guidelines of Muslims. So we have these great examples in Prophet Muhammad, and for us, Prophet Jesus, for Christians, Jesus. And then you have a history of men who are not living up to the same mercy, respect, honor, dignity that these two great examples lived up to. So we may be able to hold our religious histories in contempt, or we can hold our religious histories responsible for where we're at today. But the reality is, if we're honest, if we're religiously honest, and if we're academically honest, our religion doesn't come from those histories. Our religion comes from the point from whence they began and what they meant to give us. So they gave us power. And then I would say locally, first of all, Jim, I'd like to say that Pope Francis and Imam Tayeb, they basically must have saw me and you at a church talking and said, you know, how can we bring this to an international scene? Because these local guys are just not cutting it anyway. So I think that that locally, there are amazing examples within Fresno and the Central Valley and California, the United States, of organizations that are bringing together different religions and living up to these ideals. For one example, we're talking about religious plurality, and we're talking about religion, and we're talking about faith. What about the idea of economic violence? The Pope and the Imam bring up the fact that because there is an inequity in the distribution of natural resources, that this creates an injustice that we have to address. And since our world is such that there is such a huge gap between those who have and those who have not, and forget those who have, I'm talking about those who have and those who have not, the idea of I'm better than you is not that far off. Because you keep from people their economic rights, you keep from people their religious rights, you keep from people their rights of movement, because we talk about citizenship in this document. You take away all of that, what you have left is a powerful few that is holding down all of us, and then the whole crab in a pot mentality of when one tries to get up, everybody else is pulling them down, is pushing us into situations where we attack one another, where we disregard one another, because we're not looking at the big picture that God had for all of us. God had an idea that this world would be enough for all of us, and that He created us, and He knows how we are. He knows what's in our heart. He knows about our belief. He knew what was going to happen until the end of time, and He allowed it. But we as human beings, we think we're better than not only our original examples, we sometimes, God forbid, think we're better than God. Sorry, that was a rant, huh?
No, and that was getting to the point that earlier on you said, I do want us to get onto this issue of economic justice, because the Pope and the Imam locate that as the cause of the issue that we want to talk about now, extremism, both its roots and its possible solutions. So, Thabet, what do you think might be a way to address the issue of extremism, which is definitely rampant in the world right now? There is hardly a continent, even the little island of New Zealand, we think, oh, that's a respite. No, Christchurch can happen. Anything can happen anywhere for no reason. Well, the Pope says there are reasons why these things happen. Do you want to unpack extremism or anything else in the document, Sheikh?
Extremism, I believe, really comes. Extremism is a reflection of ignorance, you know, and it's rooted in a lack of understanding and exclusion, right? You know, this is what happens when the opposite of this document, you know, starts getting promoted. When people start thinking, and groups of people think that we're better than others, then they see the right, they give themselves the right to fight others, or to hurt others, or to avoid others, you know? So this is really what extremism is, I believe, in its roots. Yeah.
What the Pope and the Imam say here gets back to Reza's point about history, not forgetting it, but not bemoaning it, beating up on it, but admitting it. They say this: history shows that religious extremism, national extremism, which we know only too well, and also intolerance have produced in the world, be it in the East and the West. This is the best document for the idea of there's enough blame to go around. What might be referred to as signs of a third world war being fought piecemeal. That's one of the Pope's motifs, is that we might not be in World War III, but we're in so many awful, violent situations. Not just these massacres at places of worship, but countries that are still in such conflict, civil wars, Syria, all that's going on in the world. We have 4 minutes. Want to make sure you get the last points you want to make, each of you. Reza, another point that might be from the document or from your own wanting to make sure we talk about that item.
So yeah, I think that if we look at the world today, the expression of extremism and violence and terror is rampant, and it's the idea that the Third World War being fought piecemeal is not that crazy of an idea. At some point, I don't know if it's today, but at least a year ago, there were more violent conflicts around the world than there were in World War II. It just wasn't at a level where we called it World War, where there was an all-out war between countries. But the idea that that this violence has to stop is the reality. So I think it's the hopes for the future.
Yes, let's go there.
You know, if I could read. So
Please.
it says, this declaration may constitute an invitation to reconciliation and fraternity among all believers, indeed among believers and non-believers, and among all people of goodwill. Appeal to every upright conscience that this declaration may be a witness, and I'm obviously paraphrasing, to the greatness of the faith in God that unites and the divided hearts and elevates the human soul. The closeness between East and West, North and South, those who believe in God, has created, understand, cooperate with one another, live as brothers and sisters, and love one another. This is what we hope and what we seek to achieve. If we think of those sentences, it seems simple to say. It's simple to say that you're my brother, you're my sister, I love you, I want peace with, but what does that mean? It means that we have to do real work. It means that we have to ask ourselves, where am I expressing this extremism? Where am I expressing this hate? Where am I expressing this idea of superiority or thinking that somebody else is inferior? Where am I taking the right of someone else? Where is my right to make a living infringing on somebody else's rights? All of this comes together, and if we think forward, if we want to find a way to stop the conflicts around the world, we need to start thinking about bringing people into a space where justice actually exists and be merciful where it doesn't, but to use that justice to alleviate the gaps in society that we were talking about, the richest and the poorest. Maybe I don't need to have such a cheap iPhone because people are being forced to make them in China, or maybe I don't need to buy a Christmas ornament which is beautiful for a cheap price because a little kid in India has ripped up his hands to make it. Those, until we really address those, I don't know if we can dream of a peaceful world.
Last thoughts, Thaleb.
Yes, I 100% agree that the economic problems that we have is a #1 priority for religions to address, and the rights of people. There's just one little quick incident that happened at the time of the Prophet Muhammad. He said, there is an alliance that I witnessed when I was young. So, you know, he received prophecy when he was at age 40, but before that, he said when he was young, he witnessed an incident where there was an alliance between all the leaders in his community. They got together to preserve the rights of the people. So if anybody, if the rights are taken away from them, or if they are economically were treated harmfully, unjustly, they will be given the right back. He witnessed that. He was not a prophet yet, but after he became a prophet, and he said, I would, if I'm invited to it in Islam, I would join this. And this is, I believe, why we're here. We want to join this. We want to join this we want to be on board here, you know.
Thank you, Sheikh Thabet. Thank you very much, Haz Reza, for being here today to unpack a document that both of our communities, the Islamic and the Catholic, are very proud to share today.
Absolutely.
May we, God willing, with the spirit of Ramadan, live out this document all of our days forward.
Amen.
God bless.
Thanks, Jim.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.